He is a graduate of Iowa Writers Workshop, an editor at Barrel House, and a co-host of Book Fight podcast, which started in April 2012 and posts new episodes every Monday. What a weekend that must make. Tom is author of a memoir, Bury Me in My Jersey, a memoir of my football, my father, my football, and Philadelphia. I really messed that title up. Let me try that one more time. A memoir of my father, football, and Philly. See, I'm used to these Philadelphia fans giving us a hard time here in Washington. Let's see. The Young Widower's Handbook is Tom's debut novel. It was a Barnes & Noble Spring 2017 Discover New Writers selection. We are so fortunate to have Tom and Alex with us today. As you read their stories, you simply become part of them. There's a familiarity, humor, sadness, loneliness, honesty, and complex characters. I really enjoyed them. I hope you do too. Thank you. Tom, if I don't mess it up.
Hi. So Alex and I were going to kind of take turns just reading a page or two of the book to give you a sense of what it sounds like. Then we're going to talk a little bit about. I think this is kind of a loosely defined panel in the program that says we're going to discuss our books, which are both heart-lifting portraits of family and friendships and the lessons we learn from each other. So if you've got questions about those things, we'll be happy to answer. What we're gonna do, we'll read a little bit, then we'll talk about kind of where the book came from, and also there's a lot of similarities between our books thematically, actually, particularly about writing about tragic circumstances in a way that we both hope are funny. So we'll talk about all that stuff, and we will open for questions at some point near the end. So I'll just read you the opening 2 pages of my book. You don't fall in love at first sight, or first kiss even, but many months later, at that indelible moment when you awake in her bed before sunrise, her breath hot on your back, her arm draped across your ribs, the contours of her hips flowing into you, and you feel like you're 2 interlocking puzzle pieces built specifically to fit together with each other and no one else. The room is soundless and still, and you're afraid to move because you don't want to disturb her, so you stay there, unblinking, unbreathing, for nearly an hour until she finally shifts and grazes your shoulder with her lips, a kiss soft like the caress of a ghost. When she wakes up, you want to tell her you love her, but you don't say anything because you're terrified she doesn't feel the same way, and so you wait another month, all the while seeking the perfect way to make the grand announcement. Should you give her the same generic greeting cards that thousands of less deserving women will receive from men less devoted than you? A singing telegram or skywriting? You're nearly drowning in love, unable to see her without feeling your heart quivering, and at night you cry in the shower while envisioning her inevitable rejection of you because you're too awkward or too ugly or too boring for her to want you in the same way that you want her. Still red-faced and puffy-eyed, you exit the bathroom with a towel wrapped around your suddenly embarrassing body, and she reads the angst in your expression. She asks what's wrong. And in your brain, the response sounds like this: I love you and I don't ever want to lose you. But somewhere between brain and mouth, the words mutate into this: I want to spy on you, which you immediately acknowledge as being creepy. And she tells you, yes, it really is creepy, and you try to explain that you are not actually a creepy person. What I mean is, I want to watch you say, and she says, that's not much better at all. And understanding that she has vaguely defined anxieties about invasion of privacy, understanding she's a more fearful person than she wants people to know, you tell her it's like this: You totally and completely trust her, and you don't want to spy on her in that way, but rather you want to watch her because you love her so deeply and want to know everything possible about her, even the parts of her she feels compelled to hide from you. All you want is to be entrenched in the knowledge of her and to wrap yourself inside of her being, and she says, yeah, that's still creepy. At which point you think perhaps the only rational solution is to dive headfirst through her bedroom window and disappear forever, but then she adds, I love you too. And then things take a real dark turn in about 5 pages. But that's kind of just the sense of how it starts.
That's so great. Hi, everybody. Just before I start, I'm just going to make a comment about readings. it's really hard when someone says, "Oh, can you just read a little bit from your book?" Because it's really difficult to know what you should choose to read. And I'm never sure whether this is an art or a science, because you need to, it's very hard because you want to pick something that is, preferably funny, which always helps. And then it needs to be something sort of usually quite near the beginning, because you don't want to spend 10 minutes explaining the setup. But most of all, you want to choose something that's representative of the book as a whole. And that's difficult to do because novels are big, complicated things, and they're actually resistant to this kind of reductive approach. So I'm just telling you this because anytime you see an author read a particular piece of his or her work, you should know that inside they're probably going, I wish I should probably have done that bit, or maybe I should have done that bit. So it's a hard thing to do, but and that's just all by way of elaborate disclaimer before I begin. So the one thing that I think I have to tell you about this is, so my book, Setting Free the Kites, is set in Maine in the 1970s, and it tells the story of two friends, two teenagers, and we're just about to meet them both. The story is narrated by Robert. His friend is Nathan, and I think all I need to tell you, apart from that, is that what I'm about to read takes place the afternoon of Nathan's father's funeral. Nathan led me to a wooden shed that stood behind the house. He pulled back the latch and ushered me inside. There were two large windows, one looking toward the house and the other towards the ocean. The walls, floor, and ceiling had all been painted dazzling white. There was a long table in the middle of the room. Forests of color-flecked paintbrushes stood in grimy glass jars. There were hacksaws of various sizes, hammers, pliers, spools of thread, and a regiment of glue pots. A heavy iron vise was fixed to the edge of the table. From its grip emerged a complicated three-dimensional matrix of pale balsa wood rods. But it was the display on the walls that caught my attention. Kites were mounted in neatly ordered rows. There were squares, rectangles, and fat diamonds of tautly drawn fabric, a glorious riot of color. "This is my father's workshop," said Nathan. I looked around the room at the kites. "He made these?" Nathan nodded. "Pick one," he said. "We'll take it out to the beach and fly it." "Really?" "He didn't make them to hang on a wall, Robert." I pointed to an orange lozenge with flashes of bright yellow jagging diagonally between its corners. "That one." The moment we stepped outside, the fabric began to billow and snap in the breeze. Nathan steadied himself as the kite came to life in his hands. And just beyond the workshop was a weathered wooden staircase leading down to the beach. I followed Nathan down the steps. The beach was in fact a cove cut off at both ends by jagged promontories of rock. At the ocean's edge, Nathan threaded the white line through a tiny metal eye in the center of the kite's frame, and then he handed the spool back to me. I began to run along the sand, lifting the line high above my head, tugging it upward as I went. The kite caught a gust of wind and streaked into the sky. I allowed the nylon to unspool quickly, giving the greedy winds what they wanted. Nathan joined me by the water's edge. We watched the kite bob and weave above us. I could feel the tug of every gust of wind in my fingers. I lost track of time then. There was nothing except the kite and me and the thin cord that connected us. At some point, Nathan stepped forward and took the line from me. I surrendered without protest, but did not take my eyes off the kite. We stood side by side, hypnotized by its gentle dance, and neither of us said a word. And then, without warning, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a penknife. Before I knew what was happening, with one quick motion, he cut through the line. The kite spiraled upward until it vanished into the clouds. "What did you do that for?" I demanded. "My dad wouldn't have wanted his kites trapped in that workshop." Nathan smiled at me sadly. "He may be buried in the ground, but I can still set his kites free." There you go.
As you were reading, I did an event like this at University of Virginia, where the other author came in. She had 4 books, and she set up actual book stands with all of them across the front of the thing. So I thought of, while the guy was taking pictures of us there, that I wish I'd had a more professional setup. So if you want to, just in case someone comes by again.
Well, and I'll tell you, so the person coming on after us, one of the people is McAllister, and I met her in where was I? In Minneapolis at a book event there, and someone took our picture. And Greer's a real professional because she held her book like this. And I was standing there with my hand over my name like this. So, you know, there are ways of doing this, and I'm a rank amateur, apparently. When it comes to
So so one thing the main thing we're going to talk about, or the main thing we're going to start to talk about, then we'll probably go to a bunch of places. It's supposed to be about tragedy and humor and kind of balancing the tone and things like that. I would also actually let's start. I have a question for you, Alex. Actually, it's not related to the topic of this panel at all. Which is, so the book is set in Maine in 1970s. You're obviously not from either of those places.
Well, I am from the 1970s.
So how much research did you have to do to put that together, or was it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I set the book in May. Originally, the book was going to be let me start another. The climax of the book in my head always involved a lighthouse, and so I always knew that I wanted to set the book in New England. Although when I was in Seattle, it was pointed out to me that they do have lighthouses in the Northwest as well. But I knew it was going to be in New England, and for some reason I thought I wanted to do it in Rhode Island until I realized that I don't know anything about Rhode Island, so that didn't make a lot of sense. So I moved it up the coast to Maine, and I know Maine quite well. We tend to go there most summers, and I have a lot of friends there. And I always think it's a good idea to write about a place that you know and a place that you love, because I think that comes through in the writing. And you know, Maine is a beautiful place. Have you been? Do you know Maine very well?
Last summer, my wife and I went there. Actually.
So it's a beautiful place, and it's a beautiful place all seasons, for all 4 seasons for different reasons. And I really enjoyed writing that. And of course, the other great thing about it is that when you set a book in a place and you go, it's research. And one of the great things about research is tax deductible. And it's not entirely coincidental that my next book is set in Paris. And the next one I maybe will do, I don't know, the Bahamas or somewhere.
Okay, so I've been curious about that since we were paired up for this anyway. So I know some writers who enjoy the research almost as much more than they enjoy the writing, I think, and then others who would do the bare minimum just to fake it.
No, I hate research.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a lot. I didn't have to do a lot of research for this book, except for about the disease that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But for my last book, I had to do a lot. And you know, the key always is to wear it very lightly. And you know, I read about crop yields in Missouri in the 1930s, so you didn't have to, kind of thing. And so it's, you know, I don't especially enjoy research. I know some people do, but. Yeah, no, it's as little as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Right, well, so you know, we're going to talk about sad things, and I'm just going to start by saying I'm really delighted to see your wife in the audience and you said that when we were talking about it before that the first question you always get asked is. Is your wife still alive? And there she is. So, yeah. But so my question though is, what drew you to write about this topic? About because the book is, I mean, it's a beautiful book. I loved it, but it is very, very sad. So why did you go there?
Okay, so like Alex said, that first chapter ends. There's sort of there's a lot of build up, and there's a real gut punch where the wife ends up dead at the end of the first chapter. Then the book kind of follows the hunter, the protagonist, kind of trying to piece his life together after the loss of the very sudden loss of his wife. And I think it came together while my wife and I were on vacation, actually in Seattle. And it was our anniversary. I teach at Temple University, so we tend to vacation around the same time we got married, over our anniversary. And we were talking about kind of future plans. Where else will we travel? What places should we go to? And because both of us had parents die when we were relatively young. When I was 20, my dad died when we were 21. her mom died. I was just corrected from the
Heckle.
It would actually be helpful if every time I did these, if I had a fact checker next to me. But but because of that, it was a pretty formative thing. It's not that, I mean, plenty of people have had parents die younger than us or have much more tragic circumstances. But for both of us, it's kind of a thing that's been in the back of our mind. We both had parents die in their early 50s. And so we were 29 at that time. This was several years ago. And it was just like, well, let's not count on having another 4 decades, basically, to do whatever we want. And that was just sort of a general conversation. We ordered more wine. We started talking about who would be better off dying first. And
Oh, that's such an easy question to
Yes.
ask. Always, right?
I mean, in this case, for sure. I mean, she knows how to pay our bills. Like, she knows the login for our online bill pay, for example.
Yeah, I have no idea what a login for my online bill pay is.
So even just basic things. Anyway, so it ended up, I probably made a joke about I would take your ashes with me on a road trip, and that basically, that's the plot of this book. This guy takes his wife's ashes with him on a road trip across the country, and then she said, "Oh, that's a book." Oh, right. So then we started kind of jotting notes down, even right there at dinner, kind of like on the back of the napkin and stuff. So the idea basically came out of a drunken anniversary conversation. It's the very short version of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I'm interested in is the appeal of that as because sometimes some people would have gone, yeah, no, that's a little too bleak, but that just appealed to you as
Oh yeah. This is the first time I've had to compete with a train during an event, and I'm gonna lose.
Yeah, we're totally going to lose this.
Yeah.
I once did a reading of. Oh, yay! Perfect. I once did a reading in Barnes and Noble, and which I had scheduled, and it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I literally, people were sitting there. The PA didn't work, and as I opened my book, a 24-piece tuba band began to play just outside the shop. It was, and I have a soft voice anyway, so that wasn't one of my better events. But yeah, even a train is worse for sure. I've completely forgotten what we were talking about now. But
let's just hope there's not a marching band on the train. I think I was drawn. I'm drawn to sad books and sad entertainments in general. I like things that I tend like. The sort of movies I like tend to be the ones that are extremely long and dark and sad. The kinds that I understand why other people wouldn't like. The book or the movie, it's the long title. Brad Pitt is the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert. I think that's the thing. It's this like 3.5 hour kind of slog of a movie of just like sad people who hate each other.
And you
I
like
sort
that?
of love them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
However,
you don't have kids, do you?
No, but I also like things that have a sense of humor about them. That movie does not have a sense of humor at all. But I think the books I love the most are the ones that take really sad material and try to be very funny with it. Like the first books as like a 16-year-old in school reading, with like Kurt Vonnegut books or something like that, which he's a whole different thing. I'm not comparing myself to him. But that idea, so the book Slaughterhouse 5 is about firebombing that killed
Dresden.
hundreds of thousands of people, and it is hilarious. George Saunders, who the book that's for sale here, Lincoln in the Bardo, is a little less funny than his other books, but a lot of his stories are extremely funny and about some of the saddest people in the world. Just like, and I just love those. And so, like for me, that's what I want, And so, like, as a reader, as a writer, the thing I want is to see people put in really sad situations and then see if there's ways you can find humor in them, basically.
Yeah, I feel much the same. I think that books. One of the reasons why I write books is to sort of hold up a mirror to life and sort of see what it looks like, and to see whether we can learn something through the prism of these stories that we tell. And if you're going to do that, then you need to. It can't be a one-dimensional or one single-faceted thing. It needs to have all elements, and so there needs to be tragedy and there needs to be comedy. And the very first book I wrote, which was back in 1990 something 8, I set out to write a comic novel, which was a really dumb thing to do because comic novels are very difficult to do. But it was, but that was all there was, and it was fine. It did okay, but it's much more interesting to try and cover the gamut with any one book, so that the whole I laughed and I cried. I mean, for me, that's I'll take a great big tick for that one. That's exactly what I want to do.
Yeah, I think, and so I teach at Temple University, where we have undergraduate fiction writers, and we talk about this a lot, where like a lot of young writers are really drawn to just writing really miserable, sad stuff.
Right.
As I was too. I just wanted to write the darkest thing I could write, basically, to see what I could get away with. Mm-hmm. But the only book I can think of that I ever read that I liked that was just sad from start to finish was The Road. Which is the most humorless book that I've ever read. Mm-hmm. But it's great. But it's the only book that I can think of where that had no concept of humor that I could still like. Because I feel like it seems like an untrue representation of the world.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure everyone in this tent has gone through some sort of loss or tragedy or whatever, and like the thing that I think is true of everyone's experience of it is that even, as you're standing next to the casket, people are making jokes, or as you're in the hospital room, people are making really inappropriate jokes usually. Right. But that's part of it, and I think there's this really dishonest way sometimes we tell stories that it's only sad all the time.
Right. Yeah, it's a more complex picture that we need to draw. So there's your wife. You are not a widower. So the obvious question to ask is, how do you put yourself in the shoes of the narrator of Hunter Cady? When you have not experienced what he has experienced, how do you render those emotions with the most verisimilitude? How do you do that?
I tried to. So the whole book's not that chapter. That little bit that I read was written in second person. The whole book is not. But the second person chapters sort of act almost like a diary. I mean, that's the handbook of the title, basically. I love those. I had a lot of fun writing them.
I like the second part. They're shorter and
and I can get away. They don't have to worry about plot in them. I have to just. I could just work out some ideas, and I had a lot of fun writing them, and that's where I was able to do that the most, because I could just partly thinking about my previous experiences with loss and losing loved ones and things like that, but also, I do a lot of my writing when I'm on summer break, and my wife just works a regular job where she doesn't get off for 3 months a year. And so I do, there are most of my days of writing, I would be alone for like 10 hours a day. And not that I'm writing for 10, but I'd be alone for 10. And you could just try really hard to get myself into the mindset of like, well, what if she just didn't come home today? What would happen if someone sent me a text and said, there was an accident or something, and.
So that's where you go. You literally put yourself in those shoes and just go, and so you try and make yourself sad.
Yeah. And then she would get home from work, and I would just kind of follow her around the house and annoy her. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
And in your case, in the case of your book, that there's a handful of different losses and tragedies and stuff. But the kind of maybe the biggest thing is the brother that has the muscular dystrophy, right?
Right, and that was something that I read about in one of the Best American, those collections. They have the Best American Essays, and I think it was in 2002, and there was this essay about, written by a woman called Penny Wolfson, and her son had muscular dystrophy, and it was an excerpt from a book, and I kept going back to this essay again and again and again, and I couldn't get it out of my head, so I found the book and I read the book. And then I read another book about muscular dystrophy, and then I read a textbook about muscular dystrophy. And, I'm a father, I have 2 kids, and muscular dystrophy is a really, unbelievably terrible disease. It is a wasting disease. There is no cure. And one of the awful things, and people tend to die very young. If you get to your 20th birthday, that's unusual. And I was reading all about this, and one of the terrible things is that the deterioration is manifests itself in a physical way, and you can really see the person getting sicker and sicker and sicker until they die. And reading this, and it was written from the perspective of a mother, what I couldn't get out of my head was, what would that be like as a parent to have a child go through that and to go through it yourself. I'm incredibly lucky. Both my children, touch wood, are very healthy, but I've actually found it very easy to imagine that, because as a parent, since I became a parent, my son's just had his 16th birthday, my fiction writing has changed completely, and I write a lot now just about how terrifying it is to be a father, and you just imagine all of the many things that could go wrong. So yeah, many sleepless nights, and reading the stuff about the disease. It was just I found it quite easy to think about that as a father, and again, it was not a happy thing to do. It was very difficult to sit down every day and write about this. Now, most of the story is told from the perspective of Robert, who is his brother, and that's another thing again. But it's told from all different perspectives. But it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
I wonder, so when I was writing this book, since I hadn't gone through the experience of losing a spouse, I worried about kind of feeling like an imposter, basically, that people people would email me and say, I had this happen to me, you got it all wrong. Yeah. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. But so did you have worries like that too?
Oh, absolutely, I did. And I was very gratified. There was one friend of mine who I didn't even know, but when she was younger, had lost a sister. And she said to me that there's a piece in the book, and interestingly, it's in your book too, and it's about what happens when you wake up in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
And you have this moment before reality crashes back in. And she said to me, how did you know? How did you know that is what happens? And you have this moment, and then you remember. They've got, and I wish I had a good answer to it. And again, it's just like, well, I put myself in the shoes. I mean, being a novelist is all about parts of being a ventriloquist and being empathetic and just using your imagination to make that leap into those spaces where you haven't necessarily walked. But so I was, no one's written me any nasty emails, not yet anyway. But I seem to. They seem to be okay with it.
That's good. I mean, hopefully they would probably just write a mean review on Amazon or something.
Oh, well, I don't know. I don't look at my Amazon page.
I don't either, but my mom looks at my Amazon reviews, and she'll send me texts to say, someone wrote this mean thing, and I was like, Mom, this is why I'm not looking.
Yeah, she needs to stop doing that.
Yeah. So... I guess you sort of answered this already. What kind of stuff were you reading as you were writing this? I mean, are you the sort of person who tries to read books that are like the project you're on, or are you trying to read?
Oh no, I tend to read the opposite.
Yeah.
And I read. What do I mean? Because I do this festival now, my reading is pretty much predetermined by, particular people who are coming or particular people who are looking at coming. So I still read for pleasure, but sort of less so. And we were talking about research, and I read little as I can for research purposes. I don't actually remember what I was reading in particular, but it wasn't stuff that was especially sad.
Right.
One always wants one's own books to be sort of sui generis and what they are, and not. I mean, I remember when I was much younger, when I was first beginning to write, and I was rereading some Jane Austen, and you can tell the two chapters that I wrote while I was reading Pride and Prejudice, because suddenly the language became far more flowery. And I'm sort of terrible like that. I'm like a parrot, or a mixture of a parrot and a sponge parrot, I suppose. And so whatever I'm reading, it tends to sort of come out in my prose. Maybe less so now that I've done it a few times. But no, I don't ever have any. And I know some people, when they're writing their novels won't read any other fiction because they're scared that somehow this is going to happen. I don't have any hard and set rules like that. Do you have anything like that, or do you?
No, I don't have. I definitely don't have. I'm not as systematic as some people I know. Some people I know have real reading programs that they're on. They're trying to. In the case, the thing I'm working on now is I want it to be a very short novel, and I tried to read a lot of short novels to see how they work, basically. But that, it wasn't no thematic stuff. It just basically I wanted people to tell me what's a good novel that's 130 pages, or And
so, what is a good novel that's 130 pages?
Good question.
Thanks.
Great Gatsby's not far from that, actually. But William Maxwell's book, So Long, See You Tomorrow, I think is like 140. That's really good. There's a book called Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. He's a Mexican novelist, also quite good.
Have you read Chesil Beach, On Chesil Beach by...
I have not.
Ian McEwan. That's very short. I haven't read it, but I know it's very short. I can see it.
That's all I'm looking for. So this is another kind of weird thematic, or another weird thing that overlaps, or that our books have in common, is my book has a whole pivotal scene at a Renaissance fair. The first scene where the first stop Hunter makes is at a Renaissance fair where someone steals the ashes from him because he thinks it's a weapon or something. Your book, actually, basically every review of your book mentions that this was the highlight of the book, that the King Arthur themed theme park called Fun-A-Lot. Is that right?
Yeah, Fun-A-Lot.
So,
yeah.
Well, where did that come from? Was that just you just thought it was a fun idea and you ran with it?
No, I mean, they always say write what you know, and there's a big debate whether you should or you shouldn't. But I did, and this is going to sound incredibly implausible, but this actually happens to be true. When I first got to Missouri, my first job was to run the largest outdoor water park in central Missouri, which is called Big Surf. And so a lot of what I wrote in the book about the woes of running an amusement park was from my own experience. And one of the things that I did when I was doing that was I said, well, we need to have a mascot. And so I commissioned an artist to draw a cartoon of a shark. And we then had the shark made into a costume. And while this was going on, I got a phone call from the company who was doing it. They're out of California. They make all the costumes for Universal Studios. And they said, Mr. George, we're busy making this costume. How tall is the person who's going to be wearing the shark suit? And I said, well, I don't know, about average height, I suppose, and put the phone down. So in retrospect, that was a very bad move on my part, because the only other two people who worked in the park full-time were both over 6 foot tall. I am not over 6 foot tall. And so there are still adverts in the summertime. I think they're starting next weekend after Memorial Day. They still run the same ads for this water park. And if you are unfortunate enough to find yourself in the middle of Missouri in the middle of summer, you will. I see you laughing, Ollie. You'll turn on the TV, and you may see an advert with this adorable 7-foot dancing shark by the side of a wave pool. That's me. I am the person in the shark suit. And I should also point out, I'm an attorney. And so you can imagine the hysterical jokes about sharks and attorneys that I had to put up with. And those jokes are just as funny the 100th time you hear them as the first. But during all this, I told myself, it was all rather undignified, but I told myself, well, the silver lining is it's all material. And I said, I will put this in a book one day. This is that book.
It was all worth it. So we're closing in on the 10-minute mark, but
yes.
before we shift into questions, start holstering your questions now. But let's go with a kind of a broad thing. Maybe is like, so you're writing about since this is back on theme. What was the hardest part about writing kind of the tragic portions of the book?
Well, I used to cry a lot, which I think is probably, I think that's a good thing. That tells you that you're doing it right if you read your own stuff. And I actually discovered when I was giving a reading very early on, when you start this and you try the various bits out. And I was giving a reading in a bookstore about when they first learn about the diagnosis of muscular dystrophy. and I had to stop because I couldn't get through it. And it is a, it's a difficult thing, and it was sometimes you just don't want to go there. You I would like to write about something else today other than this dying boy. And that was kind of where some of the humor would come in, because there can be some levity there as well when you mix it up. But you don't get to choose. I don't know about you, but I have to write things in order. And so it's like, oh no, I really want to do a funny bit today. Well, no, you got to do this bit first. It's like, got to.
Yeah, you have to take your medicine before you get to the fun part.
Absolutely, yeah. And what about you? I mean, did you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar. Like, it's not like it's not a rational choice to say like every day for the next year and a half I'm going to put myself to think about the worst thing that could happen to me, and then, and then from a writing perspective for me, the hardest part was, and we had to kind of modulate this a lot with my editor. Early drafts of this book, the narrator was very self-pitying, and I didn't mind it being self-pitying a little bit. I feel like if there's a time when it's okay to pity yourself, it's when you're in your 20s and your spouse dies. But there were scenes where it just pushed too hard, and like definitely where I realized it was too far was when my agent was going through edits. And in the margins, there's no children here, right? No. So in the margin on around page 80 something, she just wrote "fuck you" next to a thing. Next to the thing, the narrator was saying, "Oh right, this is
maybe
I have
too
to
much.
change this." Yeah, I've gone too far now.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I loved about your book was that it isn't just about what happens after she dies. It's a wonderful, touching portrait of a young marriage, and that was what I loved about it. And there was a lot of. I mean, it's sad because we know it's told from the perspective of once she's gone, but there was much to relish in the way that young love story was told.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a thing that obviously all the marketing stuff focuses on the death part, but
and they do that, don't they? It's funny.
Yeah. But that's a thing that I was hoping to do, is that because there are other books, like Heidi Pittler has a book that. Starts with, it has sort of a Gone Girl-ish plot, someone dies and they discover the secret life of the other spouse, but I kind of wanted it to be like these people were good together.
Yeah,
this was all, that's what made it sadder, was that actually they liked each other.
Yeah.
Which, was in some ways hard to do too, because it's the cliche about, happy families. I'm going to blow the whole line. But, that happy families are less interesting, basically.
Right,
but, yeah.
right, yeah. Interesting.
So, do we have any questions in the audience? Yes.
First of all, I have to put the book up here for the picture.
There
Thanks,
we go.
Tom.
This is
Tom, I love your book, and Alex, you described the book perfectly as a love story. It was beautiful. Bravo on that. I'm looking forward to reading your book now that I have it. I get it back after the show here.
Yeah, you get it back.
But one of the questions for Tom, since I did read your book, I saw it was a really great development of character. And you actually did what I'd call off-screen character development of Kate, who's gone, yet you developed her character through the stories you told her about her. I just wonder if you'd talk a little bit about, I think your book is a great book for young writers to read because of the way you did character. And I just wanted to talk a little bit. I guess your editor slowed you down a little bit, but I did like the character. I just wanted you to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I should say I didn't plant that question. With the but I appreciate it though. Yeah. So it was important. So Hunter, in his grief, is I think grief is typically pretty self-centered for I think obvious reasons. You tend to. When you're thinking about how much you're hurt and how upset you are and what you've lost and all that. But I wanted to make sure that she was an actual person. Very often there's a writer, a Scottish writer named Helen McClory, who has a story called Pretty Dead Girl Takes a Break, and it's all about how many detective shows just start with a pretty dead girl, and the character exists only to be dead and not to exist as an actual human person. And so I didn't want to do that. There's a lot of books and movies that basically create a woman to be beautiful and then die. And important to me to have her be an actual kind of fleshed out person. And as far as like trying to actually do that, the biggest change from an early draft was actually putting her on the page. And that seems probably pretty obvious, but in the early drafts, I just had it all related through Hunter's perspective. You know, Kate did this, Kate did that, but instead actual flashing back to have her on the page doing stuff, not just reacting to things that he did, but seeing her actually doing stuff unrelated to him specifically, so that it's not just the story of, so she exists as a person and not just as like an accessory to this guy. But
And that was what you did so well. And I think that my comment about the love story, by definition, that's why it worked, because you can't have a love story with one person. Well, I suppose you could, but not one I'd want to read. But yeah,
yes.
yeah. I like your T-shirt, by the way.
Thank you. It's been very popular today. So, Alex, in your book, you said you didn't do much research, but what I was, the music
Yes.
was very thorough. So, is that your taste in music? Like, it was very varied.
Right.
But in fact, like, so I love folk music, and my favorite part of the book was when you said these songs just ask questions.
Right.
And then when you talked about like the punk, they're like, these give answers.
Right,
That
right.
was my
Nicely-
favorite part of the whole book.
Nicely
Yeah.
edited, yeah.
So I was curious,
Slightly
you know,
rude in that.
doing the jazz and then the folk and then pop was mentioned briefly and then
Yeah, I mean, I always write about music, and I always write about jazz in particular because that's really what I like. So I was more like Lewis in the book. But you know, selling a book in the 1970s in America, the obvious thing to do was to write about the New York Dolls and the Ramones and all of those things. And I didn't know a lot about it. I knew some stuff about some of the English punk bands like the Sex Pistols and the Clash, but I had to educate myself about some of the American ones, and it was a lot of fun because you know these bands they were very quick. We were talking last night about the Ramones and how the Ramones, when they played live, they played the songs even quicker than they recorded them, and the concerts were over in 20 minutes because they were like super fast. And the songs are very short, and they're the major chords, and they're bright and they're brash and they're funny too. And it was tremendous fun to write about that. But I had to educate, so I guess I did some research there, and I now have a lot more vinyl, which now my son has stolen most of it, but of all of those bands as well. So that was a lot of fun, and I did, I guess, thinking about it, I did do some reading as well about Iggy Pop and the punk thing. So, but I like writing about music. It's a challenge because it's a totally different medium, and I always have done that. But thank you. That's I appreciate the question.
So did you count the the vinyl purchases as tax write-offs as well?
No, but I totally should have done that.
So it's just too late now. We probably have time for one more question if anyone has one.
Yeah.
Or if not, I think
I had one more question. Sure. And the question has to do with when you read your book, the names that you choose for your characters are quite unusual. Kate being the only almost normal one, and it's spelled wrong, sort of. And so I was just wondering how you chose those unusual. Like Hunter's not really a normal name, or I just kind of wondered if you made a thought about those names. How'd you get those names?
There's a wide variety of. So Hunter I picked because I have so many male students named Hunter. It is I'd say Hunter and Max are the two of the four most common names I get. Also like Mike and Joe. But you know
They're not so rightly.
Oh yeah. It's a more. Yeah, Hunter's more memorable than a Joe. No offense to Joes.
Careful.
Then Kate. I have a ton of Caitlins spelled in any number of ways. The variety of spellings of Caitlin is infinite, as it turns out. But the reason. Her Hunter's last name is Katie, and I just picked that honestly because I thought it would be funny if her name was Katie. That was someone asked me at a reading like, do you know that happened? And it was 100% because I was a joke that made me laugh every time. Which is the same. I think Kate's brother is named Brutus, which so I was sure at some point someone would say like, what are you doing with that name? and they never said anything. And so I just let it keep going. So,
You know,
I was sure an editor at some point would say, you can't name someone that. But here we are. It's in print now, so.
too late.
Yes.
All right.
All right, thank you everyone.
Yeah,
thank you for
very
coming. Thank you for
much.
asking questions. Thank you, Gaithersburg.